You guys have started. Good? All right, go get the thumbs up. All right, so like I said, we are not going to be covering fully Chukat and Balak, which is why it's the names of the portions. It's a double portion.
Is it like a book?
No, it's just two portions put together. So we're not going to be covering all of it because there's a lot of stuff in there. We only have like an hour and a half tops. So instead, which is why I was hoping more of you would watch the video. So it's good to understand what's going on in the portion because we're going to be addressing the red heifer in the room. By that, we're going to be focusing today as a deep dive on the red heifer ritual, applications within the text, and its connections to Yeshua. So we're going to be focusing solely on the contents of chapter 19. We're not going past that. So if you wanted to know more about the portion, go watch the video or read the book.
I'm just coming in.
Yes. Oh. There you go. That's fine. Oh. Wait. All right. Well, I just had away my car, so there we go.
You have a jar right here.
I don't know what that is. This is not my cow. I don't know what that is. But anyways, yeah. So these are some of the common questions that we will be covering regarding the red heifer. And it's important. One thing to make sure is we understand that the red heifer ritual is not a sacrifice in the same way. So we have to make sure we start getting that terminology out of our brains because it doesn't apply in the same way. Which is why I made sure I didn't use the word sacrifice or offering. If I did, it's a mistake. So don't hold me to that. So why a heifer? What was the purpose of the ritual? How did it translate into temple times? And what are the connections to Yeshua? These are the main 4 questions we want to address in today's class. All that being, again, within the context of the red heifer specifically. This is not currently on the Google Classroom. It will be later today, if not tonight. So it's fine. Well, now we can double up on it. So just like the portion, we can double up on it. So that'll be up in there. If you have any questions, if you missed anything, if you want the PowerPoint, it'll be there. These are resources I'm going to be using. It's going to be the colorful ceremonies of the Beit HaMikdash, which is the temple. It's in Hebrew. By Yosef Israel, Numbers 19, Matthew 27, John 19, the NIV Bible, and the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Commentary. So,
What does NIV stand for?
it's like New International Version. Yeah, New International Version.
So there's like the New English version, but that's the King James.
Yeah, it's like 1,000 versions. That's one of them. I like this one because it's more plain English. It's easier to understand. So, first let's start with the blessing of the Torah reading. Baruch atah Adonai hamavarach, Baruch Adonai hamavarach leolam vayet, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bacha banu mechol ha'amim, v'natanu lanu et torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. In English, blessed is you, Adonai, who is blessed. Blessed Adonai, who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples and given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah. Oh, I was going to say. Oh, it's Mikey. Speak. Hey, we got it back. Very cool. Nice. All right. Probably just crashed in the ditch or something. Anyway. So first off, Numbers 19. So the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is a requirement of the law, that the Lord has commanded, tell the Israelites to bring you a red heifer without defect or blemish, and that has never been under a yoke.
Under a yoke?
It's never been used for labor. It's free-range cattle. You didn't put a plow on it. You didn't have it tow a wagon. You didn't do anything like that. 55. Give it to Eleazar, the priest. It is to be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. And Eleazar, the priest, is to take some of its blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting. While he watches, the heifer is to be burned, its hide, flesh, blood, and intestines. So, first question. Again, is this a regular offering?
No.
Thank you. Very good. Very nice. No. Let's read that again to find out some of the details why it's not considered to be that, given the text that we just read. So Eleazar the priest, first off, this is the very beginning of the portion. Aaron's not dead yet. So Eleazar is not the high priest. He's a Cohen, but he's not the high priest. So that's number 1. Outside the camp. Right there, number 2. If it was an offering or a sacrifice for unintentional sin or for ritual purity, like we see the other offerings, it would be done on the altar, inside the tabernacle. It's outside the camp. Slaughtered in his presence. It doesn't say he has to be the one to slaughter it, but it's in his presence. Down at the bottom, the heifer is to be burned. It's hide, flesh, blood, and intestines. We've been reading that part of every sacrifice or offering, within reason, there are some that are burnt as a free will offering, burned completely. But for the most part, the sons of Aaron and the Levites get a portion of that to eat. In this case, they get nothing. It all gets burned, all of it, everything. So let's go to the first question. Why a heifer? For that, we can go to the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Commentary. See right there, red cow. Red cow, right there.
The process begins with the
Selection of a quality red cow. Thank you.
A roan or reddish brown color that is unblemished and heifer. This is going to be a lot.
If you want, I can take it from here if you want.
Okay.
All right, there you go. Thank you. It's unblemished and has never been harnessed with a yoke, in that the cow has never been yoked for any physical task. It is probably young and strong. Elsewhere, a bull was sacrificed as a sin offering. So bear that in mind. We even see an example of that within this double portion when Balak calls Balaam to try to curse Israel. They go to 3 different high places. They build 7 altars, and on those 7 altars, they sacrifice 7 bulls and 7 rams. Not 7 cows, 7 bulls. Elsewhere, a bull was sacrificed as a sin offering for the high priest and his family. You can see that in Leviticus 4:3 through 12, chapter 16, verse 6, and chapter 11. Or verse 11, I think. Or for the community as a whole, in 4:13 through 21. And so the female is specified here. The cow offers the maximum potential for purification ashes, so the ritual not need repeated often. So essentially it's because the cow is big and fat, makes the most ashes, so you don't have to do it a lot. You burn it completely. Exactly. Now, as just a preface, there's only been 9 red heifer rituals done since the destruction of the temple. So from the destruction of the second temple before that to the tabernacle, when this was first commanded, it's only been done 9 times. And the rabbis say that the 10th time will be done by the Messiah in the temple to come.
So it's been done 9 times, but the 10th time is going to be by the Messiah.
Exactly.
And you said that the red cow is not to be sacrificed, right?
Correct. It is not a sacrifice.
It's just an offering, right?
It's not even an offering. It's burned completely, and a cow is chosen because it makes the most amount of ashes. And we're going to find out why that is. The ritual. So do either ritual or ceremony. Offering or sacrifice aren't quite correct. But ritual or ceremony is more appropriate for this. So Numbers 19, verse 11 through 12. Whoever touches a human corpse will be unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves with the water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then they will be clean. But if they do not purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th day, they will not be clean. What was the meaning behind the ritual? And again, we're going to find this in the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Commentary. Whoever touches the dead body of anyone, like we just read in chapter 19, verse 11, the time period of the impurity is the common maximum length for persons who have become unclean. Now, I have a question. Is this cleanliness, clean, unclean, is this moral in nature or is this ritual in nature?
Ritual?
Yes, exactly. Very good.
I don't know how I know these things.
It's because it's all going in your brain, man. You have a big brain. You're good.
I don't know, because I feel like I have done this before, because I did this in Georgia, and it's coming back.
That's good.
To memory.
But the point,
especially when you talk about the cow and the bull and the ram, like the cow is not to be sacrificed for burning, and then the others, the bull and the ram, are for sacrifice. And I learned a lot, and then I learned about like how sin makes the Ark of the Covenant dirty, and
not just the ark, but also the altar. But again, a lot of these things we're going to get into later. But for right now, we need to focus in on the idea that the attention to death and purity stands in contrast to the prevalent cults of the dead in the ancient Near East. So this is to understand something really important. This is ritual in nature, like you were saying. It's not a moral issue. But also, like you were saying, the ritual impurity defiles the temple. And this goes against what everyone else was doing in the ancient Near East, because they all believed that death was something to be venerated, something that was celebrated, something that needed to happen. You needed to worship the dead, because in some areas, like we're going to learn, you had certain consequences for not worshiping the dead. The cult of the dead consisted of elaborate rituals on behalf of dead family members in order to assure life in the hereafter and placate the gods, or to please the gods, of death and the underworld. So in ancient Near East, they had gods of the underworld, they had gods of death. So when someone died, you had to do certain rituals, offerings, sacrifices, yes.
Like some of the offerings were food offerings.
Exactly, yes.
Like they will put the food out, and if the food was like rotting or going away, that meant that the gods were eating it or that they were pleased. And if it didn't go away, that meant that the gods were angry.
See, you already got some of this, so stop spoiling for everybody, man. You're already like ahead of me on this, man. So again, this began with the funerary rites, which is what we call these. What you're describing, funerary rites of the deceased family member, continued well after the initial event. In Mesopotamia, the text from Mari from the 18th century prescribed offerings for the dead 4 times a year, in which the name of the dead person was invoked, food presented, like you're saying, and water libations were rendered. Now, bear this in mind. In the Mesopotamia, they have this 4 times a year. Other cultures have it different times of the year, different numbers of times. For an example, we have Dia de los Muertos. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with this particular festival. This is the same deal, but done once a year. So we can see, like you were saying, food libations. And I've been in Mexico. A lot of people really like Coca-Cola. We were there during Dia de los Muertos. So they put a Coke on the altar for their Dio or their Dia, whoever died. So you have drink libations, food libations, offering incense, showing the person who is dead, invoking their name, invoking their presence. Then we have the stark contrast of the temple. You have the incense, the bread, and the fire of the menorah.
Yeah, that's Hanukkah, right?
No, this is just the temple.
Oh,
Hanukkah has one more in there.
oh, like 8.
Exactly. But this is meant to show the differences between them. We have the separation between the realm of life and the realm of death. And this is the purpose of the ritual, to make this separation. So you understand that one of these represents the realm of life and one of them represents the realm of death. Notice how there's no images of people in here. There's a lot of images of people here. There's no scattering of food and fruits that there is here. There's only one source of incense, but there's multiple over here. So there's similarities that the ancient world copied from the original pattern, which was given by Hashem. We still see that through his commandments for the tabernacle and in the temple, it's meant to be different. It's meant to be that contrast. That way anyone else from outside the world comes in and sees the temple and say, oh, that's not the same thing as death or veneration. That has nothing to do with this. These are clearly 2 very different things.
You can say like all those other nations are like obsessed with death.
Exactly.
Like Egypt, they have the Book of the Dead.
Precisely.
Like that.
And they had different ways of celebrating death, and that most people, a lot of the royalty were living towards death. Because in death, you would have your afterlife. You'd have your eternal life there instead of this limited life here.
But the only life is through Yeshua HaMashiach.
And we're going to see more of that. This is true. But remember, the ancient world didn't believe that. The ancient world thought that there was no resurrection. Once you die, you die. So
not true.
It's not true. But
like the Bible also says that when you die, you're not judged yet until the day of judgment. There's something in there about that.
That's another point of difference the Bible decides to make as opposed to the other ancient world, which is, like in Egypt, like you were saying, the second you die, you go and get judged. And then depending how that goes, you can go to their heaven or their hell, depending on what they believed. But that's the stark difference. At least one of the differences. So, like we were saying, the Egyptian funerary rites. The concluding rites took place in front of the tomb. The mummy was raised upright for the opening of the mouth ceremony. This was an elaborate ritual performed by priests so that the dead person could use all their senses in the afterlife. Notice the similarities and the differences here. The practices involved in this ceremony included purification, anointing, and reciting of prayers and spells, as well as touching the mummy with ritual objects to restore the senses. After this, food and clothing were offered to the dead person, and mourners participated in a funerary banquet, which could be considered a covenantal meal like we've been learning. The mummy was then placed in the burial chamber of the tomb, fully prepared for the afterlife. And there were some cases where the pharaoh would actually have his servants who were still alive buried with him. That way, when they all died, they could serve him in that life.
What?
Yeah. So imagine that you spend your entire life serving some guy, and then when he's about to die, and you're like 25, 32, you get put and sealed in the tomb with him. That way, when you die, guess what? You got to keep doing the same job you're doing in life. Nothing changes.
That doesn't make any sense. It's horrible.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. I agree. But now in Mesopotamia, it doesn't get any better. In fact, in Mesopotamia, it's somehow darker than that. The funerary rites were intended to honor the dead, and send them respectfully on to the next world. But according to inscriptions from Uruk, the period between 4100 and 2900 BCE and onwards, there was persistent fear the dead might return. Sometimes a fugitive soul would manage to escape from the underworld by their own design. Other times they were given leave to return to the living to right a wrong and deliver a message. The most common reason for a haunting was improper burial and funeral rites. So, in Mesopotamia, they believed that the gods had a heaven, but only the gods stayed there, right? Because
It's like the Greeks and the Romans.
exactly, but humans had no chance of getting there because humans were made as slaves. They were made to do all the work the gods didn't want to do. Dig the ditches, grow the food, get the water, things like that. Awful stuff that always sucks. So the gods made humans to do that. And then because the gods don't want humans to be around them when they're dead, because I don't want my slaves near me when they're dead, that's awful. They made another afterlife that's not even very good. You just kind of sit around and do nothing for all of eternity and just kind of, that's it. It's like purgatory on steroids. And that was their afterlife.
That's crazy.
And so if you didn't bury someone right in Mesopotamia, in their mindset, then that soul would somehow escape because that's what they want. Anyone who dies and goes to that afterlife wants to come back to life. Because at least up here in this plane of existence, we have the sun, we have happiness and joy in some regard. So we have two different ways of looking at death from the ancient Near East. One of them is more fear-based. One of them is more out of a veneration.
What is veneration?
Like a worship of the dead. They worship the dead because their afterlife is good, depending on how moral they were, and they wanted to get there, especially the rich. Down here, they wanted to bury you to make sure you didn't come back to haunt the family because they didn't want you around anymore.
So why they killed them or something?
No, well, that's a good point. Let's say my grandpa died, right? And he wasn't a nice guy. But I want to make sure my grandpa doesn't come back because he wasn't a nice guy. And he's going to be really mad that we didn't bury him right. So let's make sure we bury him right. Let's make sure he has all the food and stuff he's going to need. He has all the things. That way he goes and stays dead forever. We don't have to deal with him anymore. That was kind of the attitude for the Mesopotamians. It wasn't always the best. So in Ezekiel 43, verses 7 through 9, and this helps to hammer home the point of the ritual. This is the point of the ceremony. And he said, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. People of Israel will never again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings by their prostitution and the funeral offerings of their kings at their death. When they placed their threshold next to my threshold, and their doorpost next to my doorpost, only a wall between me and them, they defiled my holy name with their detestable practices, so I destroyed them in my anger. Now let them put away from me their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings, and I will live among them forever. So I will live among them forever.
And is this about God or is this about a pagan god?
No, this is about God, because this is found in Ezekiel directly.
So, okay. He said, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. The people of Israel will never again defile my holy name, neither they nor their king. But what is prostitution like?
So in this context, along with the context of the portion itself, or not the portion, this chapter, it's referring to the millennial reign. So in the future, when Israel no longer defiles themselves by following other gods, which is what they mean by prostitution, going to other gods, to other masters and worshiping them, just like we do in the world, even when we don't know it. When that's done away with, then that's when God will place the soles of his feet and live among Israelites forever.
Okay, and the funeral offerings for their kings at their death.
So this is the issue. This is the problem. When we have people later on during the time of the kings and the judges, people that still venerate death, they're allowing the world and their funerary practices to pollute Israel, which again, we see the beginnings of that at the very end of this portion, the end of Balak in chapter 25. The Israelites begin to defile themselves when the people of Moab come in and they start worshiping other gods and start having issues. So it's the same pattern again and again. But Ezekiel 43 is telling you what's going to happen when that's finally done with and over, and the conditions in which God will need to actually dwell with Israelites forever is for them to stop their prostitution and be done with their veneration and funeral offerings to their kings.
When they place their threshold next to my threshold, like the doorpost, right?
Yes, just the doorpost, which again refers to different covenants we've already covered in the classes. Do you have anyone in? No? So different covenants regards to the threshold, different covenants regards to the doorposts. Again, these are making references to things we've covered before, but there's a lot of talk of covenants, a lot of talk of defilement, and a lot of talk of the realm of death and life and its separation, and what we need to do, or what is needed, the separation needed to have God dwell with us.
And their doorpost beside my doorpost was only a wall between me and them. They defiled my holy name by their date stable. What is date stable? Oh, detestable.
Real bad. Means real bad.
So I destroyed them in my anger. Now let them put away from me their prostitution, meaning their other gods or their other choices that they make, and the funeral offerings for their king, and I will live among them forever.
There you go. So again, Ezekiel 43. And Ezekiel 43 is full of this kind of language. I just kind of cherry picked this because this is a really good encapsulation of the theme. The purpose of the ritual review. The purpose of the ritual is to purify corpse impurity. Again, is this a moral or a ritual issue?
Ritual issue.
Ritual issue. It's not moral. To maintain the link to the realm of life. And the link to the realm of life lies within the tabernacle and the temple and the altar itself. To purge any link to the realm of death, which means any link to the world, because the world itself resides within the realm of death. So I got to separate you two.
Maybe.
Thinking about it. Thinking about it. He's a teacher too. He'll separate you right quick. Be careful now. So it severs a connection to the death veneration and underworld worship, which was, as we know, practiced all around Israel, but not practiced generally within Israel. At least that was not the intent. It allows us to come near to Hashem, maybe the higher level of Kiddushah, higher level of holiness, so that we can draw closer and draw near, just as was the original intent way back in Genesis. So, what we've covered so far. Why a heifer? Creates a maximum amount of ashes for as much use as possible. And if you want to write this down, this is the slide to write it down. Purpose of the ritual, to provide remission from corpse impurity. Right? Remission is a key word, because the word remission and how it applies also will lead into the connections to Yeshua. To make a separation between the realms of life and death. I put life in all caps because that's the most important of these two.
Was this an issue of ritual? Oh, we just answered that.
There it is. Ritual right there. Everybody got it? Everybody got it? Yeah. Yes.
Mary said that the last Red Heifer, the 10th one, is going to be done by in the time.
So the idea is the 10th one will happen in the time of the Messiah. And again, I don't know too much about the rabbinical prophecies, but I think it's interesting there's only been 9 that's been documented, and the 10th, that's what they're waiting for. Which is... Yes. So there has to be an altar. The Mount of Olives has to be clean as well. And there needs to be a high priest on the earth to do so.
I guess who would need
it? Well, that's the thing. There are red heifers already. So they have them already. They have the tools. They have the priest selected already. They have the land. They just need to make sure that the altar is up and dedicated and everything. And that takes
so for when Yeshua comes back, right?
Here's the thing: the altar needs to come up first before Yeshua comes back. And that's part.
So how is that going to happen?
And false saying. That's the thing. We don't know yet because it still has to happen, and that's part of the entire design of Revelation. Because you notice the Great Tribulation doesn't happen until after the altar is defiled. So for that to happen, we have to have an altar. And to have that, we also need to have the red heifer ceremony happen to purify the priests, purify everybody involved with corpse impurity. Because I don't know if you've ever been to Israel, but around the East Gate, around the Mount of Olives, there are dead bodies everywhere. There's graves all over the place. A lot of that was done intentionally by the Muslims to try to checkmate us, but that's not going to work. So, because we have the red heifer, so it's all good. So we transition into the temple.
Ooh.
Yes.
I don't know.
Fair enough. Now, think about it. Keep thinking about it, because at the end we're going to have a Q&A. So if you got more questions then, save them for that.
All right.
All right, awesome. So we're going to transition to the temple. The reason being is because in the tabernacle, we don't have too much documented evidence of what actually happened beyond the Torah. Because so long ago, and once the temple was established, then they started writing more things down. They started interpreting more things. They started codifying things or keeping the law in the way that we have now. And the rabbis have helped to preserve that so that we can use that as a reference even to this time. The process of the ritual, and this can be broken down into these 5 subsections. So the subset of the subset. So selecting the heifer, when and how the priest prepared it, the gathering of the Cohens, purifying water, escorting the heifer outside the camp, and finally the wood, ceremony, and ashes.
There was one thing where a guy got punished by God when they were with the Ark of the Covenant, and somewhere when they were doing the pagan worshiping at Mount Sinai, and Moses came down. I think sometime after that or before that, there was a guy that got killed or something.
That happened in the time of the judges. That's like years after. So that's years before the temple was built, but years after the Torah portion. So that's kind of in its own little thing right now. So starting off with selecting the heifer. And again, I got these from the Careful Ceremonies of the Beis Hamikdash, chapter 18. Chapter 18 is fantastic. I was just seeking out this book because it has really, really cool stuff. Starting page 197. A cow was bought by the Tehumah Halishka, right? So the temple treasury. So whenever you would give your tithe, whenever you give your offering of funds to the temple, it would go towards things like this. The cow was preferably 3 or 4 years old. It could have been bought even from a non-Jew. So if someone who was not Jewish had a farm and that farm was able to produce a red heifer and it fit within the standards of the temple, they could buy it from him. It doesn't disqualify it, right? So there are certain things that are similar to other offerings of sacrifice, other things that are different. So it's not as strict in some things, and it's just as strict in others. More practical.
I remember Luca or you said that when one of the priests or whatever were going inside the ark, they had to prepare and they had to have someone.
I think you mean the Holy of Holies, right?
Yeah, the Holy of Holies.
That's a separate. Here's the thing. So this, it is revolving around the Holy of Holies, but no one's going into it. This is actually, again, this heifer's taken outside the camp. So we're kind of going a little further away, but it'll all kind of come back around in a second. So the Mikdash would not buy a red calf and wait for it to grow older. So they'll buy the red heifer if it's 3 to 4 years old, but they're not going to buy a little calf and wait for it.
That's too long.
I don't know why.
Oh, you know.
The book just says it. Whenever I meet a rabbi who specializes in this, I'll ask him, but I don't know right now. So we'll see someday. If someone wants to find out, that'd be cool too.
Maybe do some more research.
Yeah, definitely. If you want, you can do some more research too.
Oh, I can.
Good. So the cow should not have any black or white hairs, though tiny hairs don't matter. And hairs with red roots and a black or white tip could, however, have been cut short to leave them completely red. So 2 black horns or hooves could usually have been removed. So this seems like details that don't really matter, but it's important because this is not specified in the portion. When it talks about the red heifer, you don't get any of this. A lot of this came from the rabbis and the Sanhedrin and the judicial body at the time reading the text and saying, okay, well, we have a red heifer, but it had these little red or white hairs, these little white or black hairs. It doesn't disqualify it. It has slightly longer hairs, though. What do we do about that? Just kind of short. It has horns or hooves. Those can be removed. It's fine. So as we learn more about the ceremony, we also learn more about how the judicial body came to terms and was able to clarify and expand on the text that we read. Because, again, all this comes from one chapter in one portion in one book out of the 5. So they had to figure out a lot while they were creating all this and perfecting this within the temple. Let's save the questions for the very end. Because otherwise, I'm not going to finish it. Otherwise, I'm not going to finish this, and I want to finish it. So this must have been a cow that had not done any work and never borne a yoke or a burden. These unusual halachas, or laws, did not apply to general korbanos, or sacrificial animals, but applied particularly to the para adumah, the red heifer. All blemishes that disqualified other korbanos caused this red cow to be considered basar, unfit. There we go. Yet, when it was a dwarf or old, it was still considered kosher. So again, there are some things which would disqualify, the same as any other sacrificial animal, and some things that wouldn't. So if it's a little smaller, a little older, not a big deal. It'll be fine. So when and how the priest prepared. The ceremony was customarily performed on the 15th of Adar.
What's that R?
It's a month in the Hebrew calendar.
Oh.
Since the Para Aduma, which means what again? Thank you.
I could have answered that.
It's even right.
Yeah, but I didn't know that was Red Heifer. I wouldn't have.
But now you know. It was essential for the public. On a Wednesday, 7 days before the Para ceremony was due to be performed, the Kohen was separated from his wife, his home, and other Kohanim and brought to a specially prepared office in the Beis Hamikdash, or in the temple, similar to how the Kohen Gadol was separated a week before Yom Kippur. As we know, in Yom Kippur, they had to be separated to make sure they weren't defiled in any way before. That way they could actually perform the ceremonies and the offerings properly. That way they wouldn't die and they wouldn't invalidate everything and everybody would be full of sin. The same kind of deal. You had to be separated out before to make sure that nothing defiled you so that you could perform the actual ritual. This office was at the northeast Azara courtyard, and this special office was known as the Beis Even.
What's that mean?
It means the Beis Even. It means it's the special office. Let me see. So this is a little video. So this is from the Second Temple app. If you haven't gotten it, I was just getting it after Shabbat. This is what the office looked like. This is where the Kohen would separate himself the 7 days before.
It's like a video game.
These are some of the housing quarters for the priests in the temple. So when you were a priest in the temple, you had places to sleep, you had places to rest. By the way, I put the controls to be invisible, so it's really hard to move around right now, but you can see that.
It's a nice video game.
Right? It's not a video game. It's a simulation.
Ooh.
So, this is accurate to the current construction that we have of the records of the Second Temple. But you can see how it was created, see how it was done. And my guy in this is a little too tall, but he's just going to jump right through, wait for it, and figure it out, and there we go. Okay, so we can see that you're in the upper level of the Azara. Bring down, and you can see within this chamber more housing for the instruments, for the other priests, food, a laver, they can wash themselves. All this existed within the temple, and it's what we call the infrastructure of the temple. This is what made it all possible. You can see as we go up these stairs into the specialty room, there's carts to help pull everything around, and there's the altar. So this is where this particular office was that the Kohen would separate himself 7 days before. This is where it was in relation to where we know the court of women, the altar, the court of Israel. This is where it is. You go through the Nicanor gate, and there is the court of the women. So that's where it was. And then I cut it there because then I went a bunch of did other stuff, but that's not as fun. So here's another image of the office. They have a desk, light, bed, place to wash. That's what they needed. Some windows. Yes. Precisely. Yes. So it was done for the same purpose, but for different holidays. Yes. No.
So I think somebody app.
Oh, the app?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, you probably don't. Your parents probably do. I don't think you have. After Shabbat, we can talk about that. Hello there.
Nice hair. Thank you.
So, okay. So this is something that when I first read this kind of blew my mind. But this is pretty cool. So the gathering of the Kohen's purifying water. Children who had been born and brought up in Jerusalem under special conditions so that they never became contaminated from Tumah Me'is, which is corpse impurity, but coming into contact with a human corpse, were used to collect the Kohen's purifying water. Despite these precautions, the children first immersed in a mikvah to be ritually clean before setting out with stone jugs to collect water from the Shiloach, or the Pool of Siloam, south of Jerusalem. It's interesting because the Pool of Siloam is considered to be one of the lowest points within the city of Jerusalem. So it's funny that they're going from one of the highest to one of the lowest. Here it is. Provided by my lovely wife here. We decided that this would be a good idea, and it is. So this is the Pool of Siloam. So the children would come down to gather the water from here with their stone jugs. Yes.
And they've actually expanded. If you go to Israel, you can actually stand where the water is.
In here?
Because they've been doing excavations.
Ooh, that's
and
cool.
you can actually go in, and then all the path that goes up is under.
That's awesome. It's all underground
it's all
now?
underground.
So that,
yeah,
no.
they've expanded the
So that's-
when I went in 2017, it was like narrow,
Mhm.
but now they've
That's super
uncovered
cool.
more, like they've excavated more.
Why did they have to excavate so much? Was it buried?
Yes, it's a good question because Jerusalem's been around for so long. Jerusalem has been around longer than this country has been a country. It's been so with everything, all the sieges, all the battles, all the destruction, things usually get built on top of it. So you'd have the city, and then once this was destroyed by the Romans, another city was built on top of it, and then once that was another city on top of that. So you have feet of just pottery, of dirt, of cement, whatever they used at the time, different whatever
utensils, and
things like that of different ages.
It's been upgraded so much.
Exactly. But the point is to get back to where we need to go, because to perform this ceremony now and to consecrate the altar and do all these things we need to do for the Red Heifer, we need this pool, which means we need to get the cistern that this pool is under. We need to excavate it all. Now that we are starting to at this point and start expanding it, we're one step closer again to that particular time. So going back to the children getting the water, right, with their stone jugs. By the way, they'd be around your age. Maybe they're a little older, but like you guys would be doing this. So to protect them from tumah caused by underground graves, because remember, there could be underground graves under all this. They don't know. They weren't there when they built this. They don't know. So while crossing Jerusalem on the way there and back, the young children rode on large-bodied oxen, on big oxes, while being seated on wide doors, placed across their back. So not only were they born and raised in Jerusalem in a special area to make sure they weren't ever exposed to corpse impurity, but then you're put on an ox with a door on it, so on a big platform, to make sure you didn't touch anything. There was no risk of it. They dismounted on their return to Har Habayis, which is the Temple Mount, since the Har Habayis itself was built on a series of arches to protect them from underground tumah, corpse impurity, as described in chapter 19. And there was therefore no longer any need for the white oxen. The entrance of the Azara, or the temple, the ashes from all the previous paros adumos, the previous red heifers, were stored, and the ashes of the different para was used each day, except for Shabbat, to purify the Kohen. Wait a minute. So they dismounted on their return to Har Habayis, the Temple Mount, since the Har Habayis itself was built on a series of arches. You tell me that this isn't even touching the ground. No, that's all built on arches. And it still is. So you have the mountain, and then they built arches, and then they built the Temple Mount on top of that. And all that to prevent corpse impurity. Which should tell you how important it is to avoid corpse impurity.
Is this all made out of stone too?
Yes.
I figured because you told me that before.
Solid
that
stone.
everything in Israel, same thing in Afghanistan. Some of like the old kingdoms there were built out of stone.
Well, think, 'cause that's all they had to really build with. Now, again, bear this in mind. You had the original temple complex, because this goes back to the first temple too. They did this there. That was 500 by 500 cubits, so roughly about 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet, with walls of about 40 feet high. That's a lot of stone. It's a lot of weight on top of arches, not actually touching the ground.
They get that high though.
That's a great question. I don't know, because it's amazing to me. They built, and by the way, they still have cisterns and water, which is flowing in and out of the temple for drainage. So you had water going in somehow through all this. You had underground tunnels as well, just like in Disney, just like that, for the priests to move in and out of the complex. All that within this crazy structure of arches, under all this, supporting it, and at no point did any of this collapse. If you go to the Western Wall, you're standing, we've been to the Western Wall, Eva, we're standing on a false floor on top of arches that aren't even touching the mountain that it's built on. Well, I had to read this like 4 or 5 times. Are you kidding me? And look, you can see there. You can see the kids on the oxen. So now let's review. By the way, there are so many cute pictures of Red Heifer. I encourage you to go check it out. You can get lost in that. It's fun. So who purchased the Red Heifer? Who was it? The temple, what though? So it's the temple authority by the treasury of the temple. The temple treasury. Which was funded again by the people. Yeah, they have to buy it from a fellow Jew.
No.
Thank you very much. That's good. No, they're not. Very good. What was the preferred age of the heifer?
3.5.
Oh, you're so not weeks.
3 to 4 years?
Yes, so close. The numbers were right. So close. Love it. 3 to 4 years old. Stop. Again, there's the office. There you go.
But you see, I think that answers those efforts that they have now. They're from Texas.
Yeah.
The guy that owned them was not Jewish.
So exactly. That's another prime example. I see that part I didn't know. I didn't know that they're from Texas and not from a non-Jew.
I don't even know how they brought him up. They're not supposed to have a rope on their neck.
Well, there's a yoke and then there's a rope because they had to find a way to lead them. But I think it's the idea
It's
of
like a really strict
is you know what? I need to find out more about that. That's really cool because it brings a good question like how they get them there.
Because they were even saying that even if the red heifer grew white hair, they could wait a little bit and see if it goes.
Yeah, they could do that or they just cut it.
There's a lot of like rules and things.
A lot of intricate rules that aren't listed in the actual portion of the commandments regarding it, but have come about because people have asked these questions, because of these exact issues. So with these stipulations, we see, again, the evolution of the judiciary process and how we have the ceremony and the ritual now. So, after what date was the ceremony performed?
2900.
Not the year, the date of the year. It had a particular month you asked about, too.
The Abazul.
Close. Adar.
Adar.
Something of Adar. The 15th of Adar.
Oh, I knew it.
7 days before the 15th of Adar. How many days before the Cohen? How many days before was the Cohen separated? It just said it. I see the hesitation. Yes, it's 7 days. 7 days. What other high holiday was the office of the Cohen stayed for use for? Stay in use for. Yom Kippur. Thank you. Yes, paying attention. I love to see it. Fantastic. Another image of the children gathering the water for the Cohen. No.
I think you should add that not even the Jewish people understand why they do it.
It's true. Like there are
Mysteries.
it's called the mystery of the red heifer. It's a very good point, actually. A lot of the rabbis don't understand because when you read in the portion, anybody who handled the ashes or was a part of it was also unclean, but they don't quite understand how or why or like that. But it's not until you really start understanding the separation between the realm of life and the realm of death and the importance of corpse impurity, so much so that they would go to these extremes. Notice the children aren't even leaving the ox. People are handing the water to them in stone jars. The question is, why is it stone jars? Why not regular pottery? Why not bronze jars? Because the stone is incorruptible. It's the same reason why when you have leprosy of stone, you don't destroy it the same way as pottery. You scour it. You wash it clean. Because the stone itself, it doesn't get corrupted in the same way that other things would.
Oh, I think the biggest mystery, I don't know if you could mention.
No, tell me. Put the mic on. Let's do it, yeah. I got to know. And go.
No, the biggest mystery that they don't understand is that when the priest takes the ashes and he does the thing that he has to do when he officiates, or not, I don't know what's the right word, but when he does what he's supposed to do, he gets defiled even though he hasn't touched anything that has defiled. He hasn't touched a corpse, hasn't done anything, but he gets defiled himself. They don't understand how he gets defiled by not touching anything. The only way in the Bible that you get defiled is if I touch something directly. If I touch a corpse, then I get defiled. If I stand on a grave, I get defiled. But this is the only case where somebody doesn't touch anything, he gets defiled. And that's the one thing that they cannot explain.
They have no idea.
But we can. That's a good thing.
I guess you like that subway. So what were the children that gathered the water born, raised? Yeah, oh, sorry. Where were the children that gathered the water born/raised? I can't even read mine writing. It's crazy. Anybody? Anywhere?
I remember it was kind of like I remember that you said it was kind of like the top part of Israel.
Jerusalem. They were raised in Jerusalem. There you go. You're close, though. It is in Israel. That was close. Very good. You could have said Damascus. That would have been way off. So why did they ride on oxen?
Yeah, so that way they wouldn't touch any graves.
Yes and yes. Oh, what?
No, because I could have given him the mic.
Oh, you could have. You just throw it next time. Just whip it at him. Yeah, to prevent corpse impurity. Exactly. Was all of Jerusalem built on arches? Was all of it built on arches?
No.
What part was?
Temple.
Yes, the Temple Mount. Very good. Very nice. Only the Temple Mount. Which in of itself has got to be tons. Just thousands of pounds of stone, all on arches. I don't understand it. Now we're going to go to escorting the heifer outside the camp. So when the day of the Paha Adumah, which is again, what is it again? Thank you.
Red heifer.
Yes, thank you. Red heifer. When the ceremony arrived, you're close. The Kohen performed the Kiddush Yadayim Veragalim, washing his hands and feet, right? The same way he would do for any other offering. He would wash his hands and his feet to become ritually pure. Then he led the red cow along a temporary ramp built over arches to protect them from Tumas Chames, which stretched from the Shishan gate at the east of the Beis Hamikdash, from the east of the temple, across the Nachal Kidron Valley to Har Hazasim, which is the Mount of Olives. You go from one mountain to the other mountain, across a valley, across a temporary bridge, over a ramp.
199 to oh, that's the page.
Right. As usual, the ramp itself was funded by the temple treasury of the Beis Hamikdash. How are we looking on time?
You're like,
Okay, cool. So if the red cow was unwilling to walk out of the Mikdash, it could not be accompanied by another black or even red cow to encourage it to move. Lest people think, and this is very important, this part is incredibly important because this is the motivation for a lot of things done in the temple and in the tabernacle. Lest people think that two paros may be brought together, or that perhaps a black cow may be used. The Kohen was accompanied by his helper, but elders of the Sanhedrin was already made their way to the Mount of Olives earlier. Lest people think is the big issue. That's the reason why there's so much separation, so much detail, so much everything in the temple. Because anybody who comes from the nations and walks into the temple, or walks into the temple, they can't do that if they're from the nations, goes to Jerusalem to see all this, they can't make the association with where they came from. They can't say, oh, that's clearly just death veneration. Oh, that's just like how we are doing with the Dia de los Muertos. We just did it. Oh, that's clearly death veneration. You couldn't do that in Jerusalem because they made such a separation between the realm of life and the realm of death and everything they did and how they operated. The point of putting children on oxen, building a temporary ramp across a valley between two mountains just to walk the thing across, just to make sure there wasn't even a chance to have any corpse impurity. Lest people think, and that's the issue. Because Hashem needs to make sure that everyone is aware that he's not copying people, that the idea of veneration of the dead did not come from Hashem, did not come from Israel. And so this is why so much is done to make sure that separation is made. The wood, the ceremony, and ashes. So the wood, and this part's really cool actually, because it doesn't talk about any of this, but it's really cool to see how they built the wood pile, how they burned it.
Oh, they made it out of cedar just like they made the Ark, the covenant.
It's a variety of woods. So they would make it out of cedars, oaks, cypresses, and smooth fig trees. So air gaps were opened up in the wood tower, so it's a wood tower that would burn fiercely to protect against underground tumah, corpse impurity. This whole wood pile also was built over a hollow floor. So this took place on a hollow platform on top of the Mount of Olives, which was connected by a ramp going all the way back to the Temple Mount, across the valley to the other mountain. The Parah Adumah was tied up with a rope made from reeds and placed on top of the platform between north and south, parallel with the Beis Hamikdash, opposite of the Har Hazasim. So they're parallel between the temple and Mount of Olives. It's right there, right? While its head was turned westwards to face the Beis Hamikdash. So the Red Heifer faced the temple, but they were in parallel. So they were geographically in the same location. Heifer was facing right over there. And here we have an example of this. Here's the mountain with the temple. Here's the Mount of Olives. Oh, this is very deceiving. This is a big gap. This is a couple miles of a gap that they built with a temporary. This is a temporary. They've only done this 9 times. They didn't just leave that there. They built it, had the ceremony, and then tore it down. They go through all that just to make sure that it doesn't ever get corpse impurity.
well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's bananas, man. So surprisingly, the entrance to the holy place was clearly visible from the Har Hazasim, which is what again? No, Har Hazasim.
Mount of Olives.
Mount of Olives, yes, exactly. So generally, outsiders could not see into the Beis Hamikdash, which is Beis Hamikdash.
Corpse impurity?
No, that's too much. The Beis Hamikdash was the temple. So generally, outsiders could not see into the temple since the walls are extremely high, 40 feet high. However, changes in its construction had been made particularly for the Parah ceremony. Keep this in mind for later.
You reword that?
What do you mean?
Reword it in simpler terms.
So essentially, they built the walls shorter on the east side so that anyone on the Mount of Olives could see right into the temple.
Like all the way to the veil.
All the way right into the altar and the veil. Not the Holy of Holies, but the veil to the holy place. So yes.
Why?
Because it was temporary, and it had its only function was to get the heifer from point A to point B. And what?
Security, I bet.
Yeah, also for security, because you don't really want to ramp from another mountain all the way to your front door. It's a bad idea. But the point is, it was built specifically for this one particular thing, and after that, it was torn down. So the ceremony. So the Kohen stood in the east, behind the parah, and faced westward. So he's standing facing the temple. He slaughtered the red cow with his right hand and collected the blood for zerikah, or this throwing or sprinkling, with his left hand. 7 times he dipped his right forefinger into the blood and sprinkled it westward towards the Kadosh HaKadoshim, which is the Holy of Holies. So he's facing the Holy of Holies. He can see the veil to the holy place. He can see the altar. He can see into the temple, and he's sprinkling it towards there. Between each of the zerikah, or the sprinkling, the Kohen dried his finger on the cow's skin, dipped it again, and did it again, 7 times. When he completed all the zerikos, he cleaned his hands on the parah. Then he stepped down and began to ignite the woodpile. The Kohen lit small branches and insert, I think it's insert, I may have messed that up, actually no, I did mess that up. Anyway, he lit small branches to put them inside the opening socially left in the westward side of the wood tower, facing the holy place. So again, he's facing the Holy of Holies the entire time he's doing this. So he comes down off of that part of the platform, still off the ground, so he's not in corpse impurity, lights it, puts it on the west side, so he's still facing. This set the wood pile ablaze, and the Kohen waited until most of the parah was burning. At this point, after the parah was burning, the Kohen would then begin to gather the elements outlined in chapter 19. We have the hyssop, the scarlet, and the cedar. I said the cedar wood, hyssop, and there we go, dyed red. A series of public questions was traditionally asked to the crowd that gathered to watch the ceremony that involved the Kohen asking the crowd, Etz erezeh, is this cedar wood? Or ezovzeh, is this hyssop? In multiples of 3. And the crowd would respond with Ken, yes, in multiples of 3. So he'd ask, Etz erezeh? They say yes. Etz erezeh, just to make sure everyone knows. This is cedar wood. This is hyssop. This is wool. So everyone is in agreement of what's going on right now. Once that was done, and after the Paha Adumah was completely burnt, all the cinders from the fire, including all the wood, was beaten down with poles and then sifted into powdered ash. Bear in mind, in chapter 19, when they're talking about this, they're doing this in chapter 19. Like everything it's talking about, they're doing all this stuff. Any blackened remnants or black remnants from the fire that could possibly be turned into ashes, as well as the unburnt, wow, I really burnt, that's fine. I gotta change that later. Unburnt bones, but these all be fixed before the thing goes up on the class. Unburnt bones from the red cow were also pounded with mortars and pestles. These ashes were required for the purifying waters that had to be stored outside the holy Azarah in the Mikdash courtyard. In fact, the parah dust was divided into 3 portions. One part was kept at the Kel Oran part, together with the dust of previous red heifers. One for the Kohanim's tahah was distributed among the 24 divisions. So now we know that the Kohens had 24 divisions, 24 families of the Kohens. Each family was in charge of a different item within the temple. One family had to do the bread, the incense, particular animals, taking care of animals, things like that, being doctors. So each family got a portion of the ashes themselves. And the rest was stored at Har HaZazim, opposite Jerusalem, on the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives.
What is
Mount of Olives.
Oh,
Mount of Olives.
Amazim is Mount of Olives.
Yeah, in Hebrew. So there was what this doesn't mention, but we do know is portions of the ashes were also scattered. I'm sure this goes with the 24 priestly families because they were scattered all over Israel. They all didn't live in Jerusalem, right? So with each priestly course, each priestly family, you'd have your time to come up to Jerusalem to serve in the temple. So when it wasn't your shift, you'd go back to the Galilee. You'd go back to Hebron, to Beersheba, wherever your family is staying at the time, but you'd take some ashes and you'd stay in that Levitical city, you would have the ashes there in case anybody got corpse impurity at anywhere in Israel. And here's an image. I'm sure we've all seen this image before. Now it makes more sense. This platform, again, no one's touching the ground. The priest has not touched the ground once this entire time. He started over here in the temple, in that office, separated out, which in itself was built on arches. He goes across this massive ramp, on arches again. Goes on this platform, again on arches, lifted from the ground. So he's never touched the ground for fear of corpse impurity. And all this is done, this is actually pretty accurate too. All this is done like this. Again, he's facing directly westward into the temple. You can see the smoke of the altar. You can see the walls are lower there. All done intentionally.
They don't burn it alive, right?
No, they don't. Again, they slaughter it, take the blood, sprinkle it, then they burn it.
They cut his throat?
Yes. Now again, it's important to remember this as well. So the cow and the heifer, a lot of animals which are kosher, which have the special hoof and chew the cud, they are chosen. You know, like when cows chew a lot, that's what chewing a cud is. So I'm not I don't know fully because I'm not a cow guy, but
They eat the grass,
eat the
they spit
grass.
it back up, and then
they just keep doing it. Like,
That's what cut is.
oh, that's cool. See, there we go. I didn't know that. There it is. That's cool. But the point is, they cut the throat because the way that these animals are structured in their biology with their veins and arteries is they're all here in the front of the neck. Whereas things like pigs or people have veins here in the front and then veins here in the back. So if you cut up in the front, you're not going to bleed out and die. Well, you are, but you're going to suffer a lot. You're going to freak out. Whereas with a cow or a goat or these animals or a ram, you slice it with a sharp, clean knife, and within a few seconds, it just passes out.
Yeah, it's like plugging a computer.
Exactly.
You're gone.
Doo-doo-doo.
But
They don't suffer.
It shows you that they don't suffer. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a clean death. They don't suffer. And this is where, in the courtyard outside the Azara, this is where the red heifer ashes were stored, from the one they're doing currently and the previous. And again, this is within the second temple. Within the first, I'm not super sure because it was a bit different. The second temple was built on top of the first because the first was destroyed by the who? Close. The Babylonians. The Assyrians took the northern kingdom into captivity, and the Babylonians took the southern while destroying the temple. So, brief review. The red heifer walked through the Kidron Valley and up the Mount of Olives. I see you back there with that. Yeah, like, no, correct. It traveled on a ramp.
I said
Don't second guess yourself. I saw you back there. More than one cow could be brought to help it walk. No, yeah, exactly. Thank you. No, precisely. And who paid for the construction of the ramp? Who paid for it?
Treasury.
Yes. Good. I hear more voices. More people are paying attention. I love it. Good. Temple treasury. Exactly. Very good. Very good. Yeah. More. The platform for burning the heifer was built touching the ground.
no, it was on arches.
Thank you. Very good. Very good. And what are they doing here?
Pouring the incense.
No, there's no incense for this. What are they doing? Look at the ground.
Oh,
Ashes.
They're crushing the bones. They're breaking everything up to make more ash.
Oh, I remember when they built. We talked about this at my house when I was living in Cypress Gardens. Something about ashes. They had to break up the bones.
Exactly. And we also just read that in the park. Now, okay, here's a question for anybody who's really paying attention. What is wrong with this picture? They're on the ground, precisely. You can see here. Let me go back. Look at that. The difference between that image and that image. There we go.
That's from the Temple Institute, though. This one.
Yeah.
I know. Shh, don't tell them. Don't tell them.
The reason the temple had to be built with arches was so that they could put the ramp, right?
No, the reason it was built on arches to make sure there was no, like, it wasn't touching a dead body. That they just didn't know about.
They don't wear shoes?
No, the priests don't wear shoes. They do not.
So,
So,
would you like to explain
Or
what
for
you
this place that they don't.
no, if you want to explain it, please explain it.
Well, I think it was your dad or it was you who told me that the reason why they didn't wear shoes on the Temple Mount was because back then, it was a sign of showing, I don't want to say respect. I don't know if it's the right word.
Yeah.
But like,
Loyalty,
Holy.
respect.
well, in ancient times, like if I went to a king's place, I would not be walking around with my shoes because it would be disrespectful. So that's the same thing.
Yeah, because
And Moses said to take off his shoes.
Yep. Exactly.
Like as a sign of respect.
Precisely.
It's on.
He still does that.
Do I just talk?
They do. It's true. Yes.
The ones that study in Jerusalem, they still do that.
Question. Yep.
Is it working?
Yes, that was also another way. If you wore shoes and treaded through someone's territory, you're saying like, "This is my territory."
It's still practiced like in the
It
East,
is,
like in
yeah.
India. I know like the low class people, if they go to certain areas, if they take off their shoes.
Precisely.
They have, like, and then they change into
House shoes or school shoes. It's again, the East has a better grasp on these concepts than the West does. The West has lost a lot of this because we are disconnected from a lot of these principles.
We
don't
kind
follow
of do it.
rules.
We kind of do it. Some people, you go to their houses.
Some do, like nowadays, but it's kind of like a new age thing. Oh, we live like Japanese people. We take our shoes off in his house. It's like a weird thing, which is sad because there's so much to be gained by going back to these times and understanding what they did and why. Well, that's why we're here, to relearn it, to regain it. On that note, why did the ramp and the platforms have to be built with arches?
So that
impurity.
doesn't touch the corpses because it would turn the person impure.
Exactly.
And it wouldn't be holding them.
Precise. Exactly. Said it better than this. Right, corpse impurity. Want to say what? What?
I said it because if they didn't do that, the whole thing would be ruined.
Precisely. Then none of it was valid. All was disqualified. They had to dump the ash and not even, they had to do it again. They had to find another red heifer somehow and do it again. So did they throw away the unburnt bones of the heifer? No, they didn't. Crushed them down. They ground them down to dust like a giant in all those myths. So connections to Yeshua. Ooh, I know, right? Hey, connections to Yeshua. So, the elements of the ceremony and the Yeshua connections. The heifer was selected. The heifer was slaughtered outside the camp. The view in the temple was required. Right? The priest had handled the heifer and the ashes had to be ritually clean beforehand. They were ritually clean after, unclean after, which is part of the mystery. The ashes had to be stored in a clean place. And the purpose was to provide remission from the impurity of death and allow us to draw closer to God. That being said, there you go. Try it now. There you go. All right, that being said, Yeshua was selected for execution. We see this in Matthew 27. Now, it was the governor's custom, not just Pilate, at the festival. By the way, do we know what festival? Passover, yes, at the festival. A prisoner was chosen to be released by the crowd. At the time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was
Barabbas.
Yeshua Barabbas. So you had two Yeshuas at this trial. Two Yeshuas. You had what? Yes, I didn't. For a long time, I didn't know that either. They were both named Yeshua. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you?" And they cried, "Yeshua Barabbas." Yeshua was called the Messiah, for he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Yeshua over to him, the good Yeshua, not the other Yeshua.
Well, I think you should add that Yeshua Barabbas.
Yeah.
He was a rebel.
He was a zealot. Exactly.
Yeah, so he wasn't like when you watch Passion of the Christ, it's like the psycho guy.
Or stupid.
I saw that already.
Yeah, but it's not. He was a rebel, and that's why they picked him because he's the one that's actually fighting for the people. They wanted that guy, not the other Messiah.
And again, this goes back to the idea of the two Messiahs. You had the priestly king of David and the suffering servant of Joseph. What we got was the suffering servant of Joseph. What they wanted was the priestly king of David because they didn't want to be under the Romans anymore. Also, the fact that the Pharisees were there and the Sadducees, and they were a bit corrupt. But that's what the people, in their mind, they wanted freedom from Rome instead of freedom from death and the penalty of death. So while Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in my dream because of him." The chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Yeshua executed. Who are the elders? That's my question.
The priests.
The Sanhedrin.
What is the Sanhedrin? Isn't that the court, Batman?
Yes, the legal body.
All the law.
Now, that being said, not everybody in the Sanhedrin was bad, but an overwhelming majority were either corrupt Pharisees or Sadducees who didn't like the Messiah, who didn't want anything to do with Yeshua, or flat out didn't believe in resurrection. Yes. Or were paid. Or again, right back to that corruption thing. They were paid by the Romans. Like Caiaphas, the high priest, was bought in by the Romans. So he wasn't really a kosher priest selected the way that it was meant to be. So everyone was kind of
It was still a position.
It was still a position. It was
They
still
would sell the position.
exactly.
They would offer,
Yeah. which again that it does explain the flipping of the tables. It wasn't done in the temple proper; it was done in the royal stoa, not in the court, in the royal stoa.
The what?
Yeah, the royal. Let me see. Go back here. I'll show you later. It's going to be cool. But the point is, the royal stoa, when they would have the money changers, you'd have Caiaphas and the people in charge of it, because a lot of the families who were running the royal stoa were connected to Caiaphas and also in the corruption, so they were getting a little extra money off the top. They'd raise the prices. People couldn't afford to do their offerings, and that left people further away from the presence of God, which is why Yeshua kind of lost it and started flipping tables and saying it's a den of thieves. All right, here we go. 21. Which of the two do you want me to release to you? Asked the governor. Barabbas, they answered. What shall I do with Yeshua, who is called the Messiah? Pilate asked. And they all answered, crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. They shouted all the louder, crucify him. When Pilate saw he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood. He said, it is your responsibility. Yeshua was killed outside the camp. See that later in chapter 27 of Matthew. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to the place Golgotha. Now here's the thing. They will say this is north of the temple. There's even like a little touristy attraction with the tomb of Jesus. It's all north of the temple. But we just learned that for the requirement for the Red Heifer, you have to have a view into the temple. So bear that in mind. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. Why is that important? From noon until 3. That was within the Talmud. And you wouldn't understand it unless we all were doing the Talmud. So we're getting a slight insight of the time of day and what they were doing in the temple while this was happening. About 3 in the afternoon, Yeshua cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing, they heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine and vinegar.
Oh, this was when he was on the cross.
Yeah, he's on the cross now. So he put it on a staff and offered it to Yeshua to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. When Yeshua had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. So he died. A view in the temple was required. Verse 51 of Matthew 27. At the moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So what curtain are they talking about then?
The blue one?
When the fallen holy place. And now here's a question. How do we know that? Because if they're writing about it, that means, look, when the centurion and those with him were guarding Yeshua saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified. Many women were there watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. So if all those people are standing there, and they see the curtain tearing in the temple, ergo, they're not in the north, because you wouldn't be able to see it, because we just learned the walls were too high. The only place you could see into the temple was in the east. There we go. That's why I said to keep it in mind. Surprisingly, the entrance to the holy place was clearly visible from the Har HaTzafim, the Mount of Olives. Generally, outsiders could not see into the Beis HaMikdash since the walls were extremely high. However, changes in its construction were made particularly for the Parah ceremony.
You need to simplify some of the things you're saying.
They're on the Mount of Olives because they could see the temple. Because they could only see the
That's
temple.
the only spot where you can see the veil.
It's the only place you can see the veil was from the Mount of Olives because of the Red Heifer.
What did the curtain look like? What is?
So they,
Like the Milky Way.
yeah, that's
Milk?
what they say.
Yeah.
So they called it the heavens, and you know how like on a clear night, not in the city because you can't see anything, but like when you're out in the woods, you look up, you see all the stars.
Mm-hmm.
They say it looked like that, but like the whole galaxy. So when they say the heavens rented, they're referring to that curtain and how it just tore from top to bottom. But again, nobody could see that unless they're on the Mount of Olives.
In Passion of Christ, there was also a temple that fell.
That movie was made by crazy people. I wouldn't believe it.
Was made by
Like the crazy Catholic people. I wouldn't believe that one. Nah, man. But again, the point is, we can verify and see where Yeshua was crucified, where he was hung on the tree, and how we can corroborate that is by understanding this particular ceremony, which is mentioned in one chapter of this portion. Yes.
Can I add something? Because your dad mentioned
do
too
it,
that like the ceremony for the bitter waters.
Yeah.
I think in the Mishnah it says that she has to be taken east of the temple, and then we see Yeshua. He would have to be east of the temple if that corroborated. And then he's also given that drink that you just read,
the wine and vinegar.
Yeah. So you see it again another connection because Yeshua, he took upon the punishment that we deserve,
Exactly.
and so he had to go through that process.
Precisely.
Balak.
Yeah, there's more similarities. Like he was shamed in the same way that the
But
woman
it
would
all
be. And
points
also,
to him being east of the temple.
exactly. He's outside the camp to the east.
Yeah.
And we know where outside the camp, not in Golgotha, not on the north, because he wouldn't be able to see the veil from the north, only from the Mount of Olives.
But then people say, oh, well, if he got crucified on Mount Olives, how would they ever be able to do the Red Heifer? But then you have that platform
Exactly.
that's built
Because
specifically for them.
it didn't touch the ground, yes.
So would the bridge still be there, or is it
No.
completely like taken down?
It's
with
gone.
the gaps still
The
there?
way I would think about it is the bridge for the Red Heifer, it's like scaffolding when you build a building. You don't keep the scaffolding on when the building's done. You take it down, you dismantle it. So when the ceremony's done, you take it down, you dismantle it, because you don't need it anymore. Because they didn't do this very often. Yeah,
I
what?
think,
It's
I don't
like
know if
night
you
times.
didn't
Night
mention how long a cow usually lasted. I don't think you mentioned it.
Sorry, what?
Like how long did the ashes of one cow last?
Yeah, that's years. Years and
We're
years.
talking not years, but generations.
Like hundreds of years.
Yeah, so like that's why when they tore it down, it was like, why would they do that? Because they're never going to use it for
Exactly.
like another,
Like-
who knows,
like
200, 300
2,
years.
3, yeah, exactly. Like maybe my great grandfather is going to need this again. So there's no point in
Like, the
keeping it.
ashes didn't have like an expiration date.
They did not. Ashes don't really expire because there's nothing to.
Oh, they
there's
say
nothing-
that bones never deteriorate, only the flesh.
especially when you crush them down into tiny powder. It's not going to deteriorate then. So again, they chose the heifer because it made the most ashes. They built the temporary ramp because, like you said, it lasts hundreds of years, lasts generations, because it makes enough ash and it's separated out and provided to all these different places so that they can not only in the temple or the Levitical cities because of the priestly families, but also on the Mount of Olives themselves. So you have 3 sources of ashes to stretch all this time.
They would use it a lot, especially if you're going to the temple.
You have to.
be purified. You have to have the
have
ashes. So the ashes like help support like say a
Everything.
huge population of more than a million people
Mhm.
for 300 years. So it was a lot of ashes.
Exactly. And the laws of corpse impurity doesn't extend just to Jerusalem. It's everywhere in Israel. So that's why it was sent to all the Levitical cities via the priestly divisions. Because if you were in Beersheba or Hebron or in Galilee and you got corpse impurity, what, you're just going to live with that now? Like, you would go to your local priest and he would have his supply of the ashes, and then he would make you ritually clean again.
But I think there's a book. I remember reading it, but it tells you like how big the pile was for the
Really?
ashes. I don't remember exactly, but it was something like this high.
It's big enough to have the big storeroom that we saw in the, like, I'll go back to it, yes.
You know, in the Holocaust, they put the bodies on each other.
Different.
And you're correct in thinking it makes a lot of ashes, but it's not quite the same thing.
Oh, okay. That made no sense.
Nah, it's all good. So, the priests who handle the ashes needed to be ritually clean. John 19 says in verse 38, later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Yeshua. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Yeshua, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. So he was a clean priest, but he was part of the Sanhedrin. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, a man who earlier had visited Yeshua at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds worth. So you had 2 clean priests who came to handle the body of Yeshua. Continuing, the ashes need to be stored in a clean place. Verse 40, taking Yeshua's body, the 2 of them wrapped it with spices and strips of linen. This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Yeshua was crucified, there was a garden. In the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish holiday of preparation, right before Passover, which only goes to show you, because it's right before Passover, they had to be ritually clean because they had to go to the temple. So they were already clean going into this because it was about to be Passover. And they laid Yeshua there. The purpose was to provide remission from the impurity of death and allow us to draw closer to Hashem. In John 11, this is during the story of Lazarus. Lord, Martha said to Yeshua, if he had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even my God, I will give you whatever you ask. Yeshua said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Yeshua said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world. So by the sacrifice of Yeshua, he provides us the remission. Now, also, he did qualify for a lot of other things, like the Passover lamb and things like that. But one of one of the things he did qualify for, and one of the things he did provide, was the remission from death. Remission from the penalty and the curse of the law, which is death. So because of him, because of Yeshua, now we have access to eternal life. Whereas everywhere else in the ancient Near East and in the world, they don't have access to that. So unless you go through Yeshua to the Father, you won't have access to the realm of life from the realm of death. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is bad odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. And Yeshua said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? They took away the stone. Then Yeshua looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, Yeshua called out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. His hands and feet were wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Yeshua said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. So we can see a literal event, which is the representation of what he did for us spiritually, and that he freed Lazarus from the realm of death by bringing him back into the realm of life. Just as by his sacrifice and as his actions as the high priest in the heavenly temple, he allows us to access the realm of life and be cleansed from, or given remission from the realm of death. So this is what we've covered.
Why a heifer? Because it is pure. What are the purposes of the ritual?
Purpose of the ritual. By the way, yeah, so we have Ezekiel 43:7-9, in case you want to get that again. Why a heifer? Because it makes the most ashes. Purpose of the ritual, separation of realm of death and realm of life.
How did it translate into temple time?
We just went through that, all the ramps and all the stuff, all the arches, and the connections to Yeshua. Any questions? Anybody have questions?
I was going to say that you forgot to add that when Yeshua was given
The crown of thorns?
crown of thorns, he was also given the red.
The red sash?
robe. Yeah.
Yeah, the red
But
robe.
that's why, the Jewish people, they don't understand, why is the heifer red? It's going to be burnt anyway. Why does it
Exactly.
have to be perfectly
It
red?
doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's all these connections to Yeshua that they're never going to see because they never have interest in seeing it. Because
Exactly.
Christianity.
They don't want to access that side of the aisle because they want to stay on their side.
Well, they had bad experience.
It's understandable. Like when you have 2,000 plus years of people saying, I kill you in the name of Jesus, you're not really going to go and believe in the guy. I understand that. I get that. That being
That's messed up for them.
It is. But that being said, the Jewish people and the rabbis have a lot of the information that we need because they have the access to the information on the ceremonies and the rituals and the things that God has prescribed and the way he has prescribed it. So we have only one half of the puzzle and they have the other half, which is why we need to always make sure we work together with our older brother Judah to understand these things.
Who's Judah?
The Jews. Any questions? Yes.
So, when somebody would use the water from the red heifer, how much water would it be? Would it just be a sprinkle or a mikvah or
It
whatever?
wasn't like a massive gallon. It was enough just to have the sprinkling of it. Yeah. Yes. That mic doesn't work? No, this one? Oh, okay, good. Okay, I was gonna say. So the question was how much water was used during the purification of the cleansing from ritual impurity from corpse impurity, and it wasn't very much. Again, it was the sprinkling of it. It wasn't like they just dumped them.
That's why it lasted so long.
Again, another reason why it lasted so long. They didn't use a lot of it. They used a little bit. They only, and in the book I was reading in cultural ceremonies, they got enough ash and they put it in the water only enough so that you could see it was there, and that was really it. They didn't dump in a bunch of ash and make Kool-Aid out of it. That's not how they did. They put a little bit, and they got the water and sprinkled it on you, and you're good. You're fine. Yes, just like we were. Let me get it. It was. Let me get it.
Oh, there's a lot of things we've had.
We did a lot of stuff. It was this water, the pool of Siloam. That water, the water gathered by the children was what they used. Was what the Kohanim and the priests used to help clean people ritually from corpse impurity.
It looks nice, that place.
It was right.
And they have a carpet there too. Yeah. A purple one with white.
Any other questions?
Was it 15 hours per hour? Is there any connection to it?
I don't know because I haven't studied too much into the dates and everything else. I would suggest doing so. Look into it.
What was the connection with Yeshua and Barnabas?
Right? Yeah, it's cool.
Escape going. Yeah.
Exactly, and then that goes right into Yom Kippur, and then that goes further into prophecy in the end times because then he's going to return as a true Messiah. So, Any other questions? Anybody else?
You know, like there is training from when you have to take pain in the military.
Mhm.
Yeshua kind of took that on too. That kind of training.
And he took on the penalty of death that we don't have to take on. That being said, because of Yeshua, we have access to eternal life. People before the time of Yeshua, they didn't have that, which is why you have 2 rounds of judgment in the end times, which is why you have the resurrection and the judgment then, right? To give people that opportunity. For example, I don't know, people during the time of the tabernacle, like what we're reading right now, they don't have the Messiah, so they still have all the offerings and sacrifices, but there's nothing that's going to stop you from death, from entering that realm of death once you die. There's nothing that gives you eternal life because there's no sacrifice for it, which is, again, something that Yeshua qualified for. That sacrifice for rebellious sin that there was no physical offering for. So before that, it was a little more bleak. Then it was only at the time of Yeshua that we had that.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, what is the importance of the Red Heifers now?
The red.
So they have in Israel right now. What's the importance of it?
The importance of it now is it tells us that we're one step closer to the rededication and the reconstruction of the temple.
I think they're like 3 years old.
Yeah.
They're 2.
They're 2. They're almost
They're
3.
about to be 3.
About to be 3. So between 3 and 4. So
What are you talking about?
So right now in Israel, there are red heifers. They found red heifers. They're in Israel now. They already have the tools set aside for them. They already have the priests selected to do this. They only need the land for the temple and to rebuild the altar, reconsecrate it. The fact that there are 2 going into 3 years, and as we just learned, the preference of the temple is to be between 3 and 4 years, means we're pretty close. So I wouldn't be, again, don't set dates because no one knows the time of the day. But there is a pattern that we can follow that'll get us there. Yeah.
Oh no, I was gonna say, but we don't know. We don't know the exact date.
Exactly.
Which is
It's
said
super
that
interesting.
there's going to
Exactly.
be a false Messiah. That's what you said, and
Yeah.
that he's going to desecrate the temple.
Precisely.
Everything plays out. Like,
Exactly.
They do the ashes of the Red Heifer,
Mhm.
and then eventually they try to rededicate the altar. And then somebody comes and does away with that. We're gonna know because of the
Exactly,
Bible, right?
exactly.
That's big, I guess.
Is all I'm going to say. When it comes to the end times and all that stuff, I try not to go too far into it because it gets a little loopy. I will say this.
There are certain things that
There are certain things we can know, like the pattern that has to occur before we know that things are going down. Means the altar has to be rededicated. All the services have to be reinitiated. And then we have to have the false Messiah, the Antichrist, come down and desecrate it. The fact that we have the red heifers is, again, one step towards that. The fact that we have the tools, we have all this thing, that the Sanhedrin is soon going to come back. We need a Sanhedrin to have a temple. They're already built.
everything's pretty much set up. I mean, they even have the area in Mount Olives. They're just
Are people?
It's just the altar. It's literally just the altar.
When Yeshua comes back and he comes to the temple, and will people disappear and their clothes be there, and then they will be dressed in robes and they will be brought to Israel?
I have no idea. We'll find out when we get there. Because I don't know. All I know is for that to happen.
They have like a lot of theories on that in movies.
Yeah.
Again, it's all theories and movies, but we won't know. We study it. The only thing we do know is there has to be an altar, there has to be a temple, there has to be a red heifer ritual, not an offering, a red heifer ritual to provide remission from corpse impurity.
So, like, if right now somebody said, "Oh, August 25th."
August 12th, 2036 is the end of the world. Like, I don't believe that because we don't have anything that's gonna. Oh, that's cool. Hey, nice.
But yes, but if somebody tells you that and you see all the signs like check mark, then you're like, I'm sorry,
Right.
but it's not.
Precisely. So that's why studying the temple is extremely important because it'll give you a checklist to know what needs to happen first before we can really start freaking out. That being
I'm
said,
gonna have to study it a few more times, all this stuff, because
well,
I don't always remember.
that's fine
I don't
because on the
always-
Google Classroom, this is going to be there. Johnny's teaching is going to be there. All Lucas's stuff is going to be there. So if you need to go in the Google Classroom, you can go ahead. On the last video on YouTube, we have a code you can use to get on the Google Classroom, so you can also see all this stuff and keep studying.
You need to tell my aunt that so she can text it.
That's not my job. You got to remember it. What are you talking about? I'm not going
Well,
to tell you about that.
what's your phone number?
Aren't you in the chat?
You're in the chat. No?
You're in the chat.
What chat?
Or you're not-
Oh. Get this man in the chat so he can be updated. Let me see. Let me get another image for us here.
Class chat?
Yeah, the class chat.
Never heard of that. How do you get on?
Do you have WhatsApp?
Grab it.
No, I have Just yes.
Well, thank you all.
Like,
Thank
you
you
download
very much.
WhatsApp.
So I hope you guys learned something. I thought it was cool. I thought this was cool. This is really cool. Let me go ahead and play that again.
I like it.
And where's
Should
that?
elaborate more on it.
On what specifically?
Just more of the Parashat. But obviously, we don't have enough time.
There's not enough time, but it's especially with this one because it's a double portion. And let's be real. For so many years, I skipped over chapter 19. I know we all skimmed it. I did for so long. Like it's just okay. Red heifer. Let me get to Balaam. Let me get to the stuff about the snakes and the plagues and hitting the stone. Phineas stabbing the guy. That's the cool part. I don't care about the rest of it until you actually start going into it and learning it. Now you understand how it has all these far-reaching implications to what we need now.
Exactly.
Everything surrounds the temple. If you don't understand the temple, you're not going to understand what's going on now, what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. Did it die? Yeah, I did. Go ahead, kill it.
Take a picture of me too.
And was the red heifer, did they do it at random, like whenever